I'll give it a go. Thanks to all three of you. That was phenomenal, incredibly interesting, and I have a number of questions, although many of them kept getting answered as the next speaker came along. But maybe I'll start with this one, which feels straightforward, but I don't think it is necessarily entirely. So Clifton referred to this about some circumstances when it may not be appropriate to bring in video or use certain kinds of recording technologies depending on the context. I was just wondering more generally about, and anybody can answer this, about when do you think it's a good time to bring in? Maybe I'll just begin with video. Are there moments, when do you think is a good moment to introduce video into a study? Are there times for studies where you've actually used video where you didn't bring it in for 2 or 3 months or something? And what were your reasons behind that? So I guess it's a broader question about just the timing of these.
I can start. Go ahead, Clifton. Go ahead.
No, you go. That's fine.
No, I think it's based on Brian, the terrain upon which you start, right? It's very difficult in some settings to introduce that at the front end. I think about some of the research that Michael Keeler and I have done on for instance, boys' pedagogies in gym class. You can imagine, showing up with a video camera on day one to say we're going to film these boys and what they do with their bodies in the context of gym, would be summarily kicked out of there. But then again, some of the projects start as visual ethnographic projects, and that's the terrain that you start on with people. I think it's though true, and I would let Clifton and Yosuke answer this more than me. I think that it's a classic case in ethnographic negotiation. It's about getting to know people and understanding what methodologies that you can use and when. Sometimes it was 3 years, Brian, before I started using a video camera in the context of yoga, because it's so incredibly disruptive in that context. So I think, like anything in ethnography, at least for me, it's something that you have to negotiate with people and what they're comfortable with.
Can I do a quick follow-up, Mike, with you on that?
Yeah, sure.
Are you personally, is it your own preference? I know you've been doing different ethnographies for a long time. For you, would you prefer to go in initially without video, for example, in terms of you gaining a feeling for the setting, or does that matter to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, it depends on what I want to know, to be honest, Brian. Video, the use of video shouldn't figure into a project because it can figure into a project, right? Just because everybody's mass mediating everything in the world and we want to go inside and look in different ways, it doesn't mean that we need to use that technology in this particular way. It really depends on your research location and again, your epistemology and your ontology for using this device. So there are certain studies that I would do where I'd say, no, I don't need to do this because the central problematics that I'm interested in, it's not a necessary way of knowing. So I don't have I wish I had a yes or no answer to that question, but it's not like I would automatically want to do anything given a group and the context and why I'm interested in there to begin with.
Thanks, man.
So can I just contribute something there? Yeah, I'd just say it's changed for me over time. One of the things, I'm in a very particular position. Like I've been part of this group, this cohort for over 40 years. And my participation in it and that presence in it and that knowing people has helped. But there still is a case where places and cohorts, and it's about knowing your cohort, that I would never dare even think about introducing the camera in threat of all sorts of things. And it's no joke. These people take this is serious leisure. This is their life. And so they police it rigorously. But it has changed more in recent times. I mean, like these technologies, the GoPro technology and all the mediation of surfing is so saturated now that to have a couple of cameras floating around is, from an ethnographer, is no big deal anymore. I mean, as I said, a lot of them are using it anyway to circulate their notions of character and to demonstrate what they've been up to, and then they turn that to their own ends. Some of these people turn that it's not just leisure for them; it's become their job. So they turn their physical capital and cultural capital into economic capital. So it just depends on the cohort and what stage they're at, and how much familiarity I have with them. But you could certainly stumble around and get it very wrong if you're not familiar with that particular culture or cohort. And there is that real risk. So I guess it does behoove that sort of research in the first place, and talking to those who have done research with that particular group before. And most of these groups, and often that has been the case. And as Michael said, it depends on the questions you're asking. Like I do research in other sports, like I've done work with refugee sport and young guys and stuff, and we use cameras a little bit, but not that much. There wasn't really the necessity or felt the need to. There's something about being in the sea and the role this media was playing in there that I just needed it. It's really hard to articulate it otherwise. It's the only thing that could open up new doors for me. I just kept constantly running into a wall, and it's brought a creativity to the research that I wish I had known about 10 years ago. And I love that creativity and the openness it brings. It's sort of like I don't really worry that there's going to be, by the end of some research, there's going to be one correct interpretation or uncovering of some truth. The whole point, the camera opens up everything. Everything becomes excessive. Interpretation just runs off in all sorts of directions. And that's sort of what it's like to be out there, You fluctuate between so many different emotions, and that it's quite radical, and there's so many ways of seeing and hearing and making sense of the world around you as you're immersed in it, that I quite like that excessiveness of it. So that helps in this generating this seascape epistemology. But in other settings, no, I haven't needed it.
I have a question, probably for Mike, but everyone's touched upon the challenges perhaps of using this video, or what do you do with it, and how is this recognized in traditional academic outputs? And I guess, Mike, as editor, you mentioned the challenge you face in terms of judging the quality and how do you assess this. But I don't know, I'm imagining this little club of journal editors. Are there conversations about how people are being very creative in the methods? How can we be creative in how we actually get this out to academic audiences?
Yeah, there is a club, and we meet on Thursdays.
Yeah, I thought so. Is this part of the conversation, I guess, of publishing?
I think probably it's a conversation that we should have a lot more than we do, because there's a different generation of researchers who are doing all kinds of things that exist outside the boundaries of the way in which we as editors think about research practice right now. And I often feel bad about this, because as journal editors, we should be thinking about not just chasing around, the newest things for the sake of doing new things, but really work that's going to push the boundaries of our conceptual understandings of the world, and the way in which we can represent in a variety of formats that. So we have space. I mean, as you know, most journals have, because of their online presence now, we have space to do these things. We have platforms. We have the ability to post, pictures, videos online. But what we don't have, and I think that starts within institutions, is a way in which we can nurture and produce and grow young academics who have an understanding of how to produce this kind of work and then lobby for it, and to say that this research matters in a particular way, Because I think, and I agree that, one of the things that we have to do is say, I don't give a toss about what people are saying in institutions. I'm just going to do this work and try to get it in some capacity. But we also have to have a conversation about assessing this. And Andrew, what we don't do right now is actually have the conversation. So if stuff comes into the journal or a journal and it's produced, unless we're talking about the journal of visual ethnography, which exists, we just sort of put it up in faith, and we don't have a conversation about how do we actually scrutinize this. And that's a tension for us, because all of a sudden we're entering into a different space where we're assessing things based on criteria that we kind of make up on an ad hoc basis. And we do have to assess how, and this is where I might challenge anybody who does video evidence. It's not just about opening up this for multi-subjectivity, because the researcher ultimately produces an account and reduces in the way in which we all do in a textual format or a new format. We produce an understanding, and we edit and we assemble and we change time and space, and we produce for a particular purpose, a way of seeing that we have at the end of the day. And I think these seminars and others are great spaces for us to say, well, how the hell do we do this? How can we do that in a way that advances some kind of understanding that we're trying to get to? And I wish I had the answer for this, but I also would suggest that I don't want to impose an answer, because, who am I to do that at this point? That's a long-winded way of saying I don't know.
Do you see any, are there things like that you could point us to and saying, this is something I saw was really exciting, and it was different, or they're going in a direction that's interesting to me in terms of, I'm thinking mostly the publishing dissemination.
Yeah, I think that, there are quite a few online journals now. But, I'm hesitant to create templates, because I'm sort of more interested in, if there's something that emerges out of the physical cultural studies community or social sport or whatever we want to call it, I think it needs to be organic. And I think that the subject matter that we're dealing with, and I think about what Clifton is saying today, it's a fantastic exemplar of this research, because bodies matter in a particular way in PCS. Mm-hmm. I think it really has to come out in the particular kinds of formations of research with participants that Clifton and Yosuke are really showing. Like, how do I work through this stuff, and how do I work with people to produce these kinds of realities? Because what we're doing is we're not just capturing realities with this in that sort of old dogmatic sense, but these videos are helping to produce realities in these particular ways. It's not just the active, or it's not just the passive capture of this stuff. It's the production of this that matters really here. And if this is going to emerge, it's going to have to emerge, I think, at least what would be exciting for me is if it emerges by people taking chances and sending this stuff to journals and having editors. Let's produce a working understanding of do this by publishing this stuff and having a community conversation, versus then creating a template based on what other people are doing and saying, all right, now let's judge the other fields in the way that, let's judge our field in the way that other fields do it. So I would, in terms of pointing to the exciting research, I think we've just heard two people who have exciting research area. And it's like, yeah, do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for your talks. I thought they were all really interesting. And I think you can all speak to this question a little bit. And you all alluded to it. What some of the ethical issues are, like with the review boards, writing visual, mobile methodologies like this, and some of the challenges you may have encountered or how you've worked through them when I guess institutions are a little bit slower to change. Anyone?
Who's going first?
I'll speak about it. So there are lots of ethical things and lots of situations I have to be very careful. And then sometimes I needed to delete the pages and such. But one of the unique situation was that when I was filming this guy, he is blind and also deaf. And then the only way to communicate with this guy was through the interpreter. And this guy I was focusing on agreed, and he was very excited to be filmed. And then he needed to ask interpreter to come. The thing is, the interpreter person seems didn't want to be filmed, but because the interpreter was a client of my research object, so for the sake of research object's wish, the interpreter couldn't say no to be filmed. Do you get that? So
Yeah.
it's a area because she's working as a professional. She couldn't say no, but she personally wasn't really okay with it. She expressed it a little bit when I was filming. So at the moment, I took my camera down. That was kind of spontaneous reaction for me, and then it still echoes in my head. I don't know how to deal with this. So just simply deciding there's white line, black line, ethically good or not, is actually dangerous way to judge, I think. We gotta be not just only careful, but also better to think there's no such black and white. That's something I got from the field experience, and this might be some kind of ethical dilemma. I can speak about it.
So I do a similar thing in terms of I'm very clear when I do my ethics application that any footage, if there is any footage and I can't make contact with the people in that footage and get ongoing, not just an initial yes, that's okay, but ongoing yes, that's okay, by revisiting them and staying in contact with them, then I don't use the footage. The footage becomes null and void for me. The amount I have, endless footage that I've never been able to touch or use or mobilize, but I still learn something from it, you know. That's when I sometimes, I won't use that particular footage in a particular way, like won't show the footage, but I might write, that's why I like the storytelling, fictocritical approach. I'll use the impression of that particular situation. I'll use that footage to inform that storytelling, to enable that anonymity to come back into it and still trying to communicate a sense of what happened and when it happened and how it happened. But yeah, I mean, often these places that I'm doing this, sometimes, you know, the camera is a fisheye lens. It picks up a wide area, and it picks up other people who I don't necessarily know or haven't spoken to, or they leave before I get to chat to them when they, or talk to them later. So yeah, that footage is no good to me in terms of ever showing that footage or making too much of it. So yeah, so I'm very clear about that. That's why I tend to like it when they're using the footage, when they attach the camera on the surfboard. It tends to just capture them. That tends to be much easier to deal with than when they carry it in their mouth or when they hold it in their hand or they put it on a helmet where they pick up everything around them. Yeah, that leads to a lot more problems and a lot more of the footage not being able to be used.
Yeah, I mean, classic stuff in ethics are, you know, as you can imagine, you know, when we teach undergraduate methods and graduate methods, we talk about all these things about anonymity and confidentiality, and, you know, can you get people's consent, UN consent, which is really, really, you know, incredibly important. And those things also go out into the world, you know, the idea is to disseminate, we disseminate. And so all of the standard things, you know, particularly if you're working with marginalized communities or vulnerable communities in the case of children, these issues, are amplified, 10 times over. Can we do this? Where can we go to do this? How can it be used? When does somebody have the right, if it's out on the internet, to ever say, I didn't want to be a part of that? I also think about, ethics in this context in a different way, as almost a bioethics question. To say, again, with the increased use in technology, to study bodies and bodies in motion, bodies in place culturally, I think we as qualitative researchers have to ask very similar questions as people in other fields. What are the implications of the use of technology, and not only the way in which we think about things and what we ask subjects to do in this capacity, but how it in part will in future define our field. And it's not a popular conversation sometimes, but we often in PCS or in the sociology of sport or in the humanities and social sciences in a kinesiology program often criticize our colleagues in, let's say, exercise physiology or biomechanics for reducing people down to their bodies and in strict physiological terms and trying to go to inside the body to understand something that defines the essence of the human experience. And I have this incredible tension, and I haven't figured it out for myself yet, in trying to broaden our understanding of the way in which human experience is defined by how we have a sensory, for instance, relationship with the physical cultural practices that we do. I think in the new materialist turn and the sensorial turn, we also have to be very careful of reducing the phenomenon that we study to sense, to physiology, the way in which I don't think that we're doing right now, but the way in which we have a sense to, like our colleagues, fetishize the body, the essential body, and separate it from the way in which we make sense out of our senses in cultural ways. I think we have to keep that not just in the back of our mind, but in the front of our mind, to say that the way in which that Clifton and Yosuke are doing it, bringing it in, not just as an element that needs to be added, but as a central element that has to mix with all of the other things that we do, studying, cultural formations and social formations. So we have to remember all of these things. And I look at that as an ethical implication of the use of technology. Does it change the way in which we perceive people and the field? I know it's a complicated idea, and I think we're still wrestling with it, and we're probably going to wrestle with it for a long time.
I have a question. Thank you guys for all your talks. It was awesome. This might be directed more at Clifton, but welcome for all of you guys to chime in. But I'm wanting to use the method of video in action sports. And so I guess my question is, do you guys have any tips or suggestions for a first-time researcher who's wanting to use the method of video in ethnographic research?
Get cheap cameras. You want when you're doing stuff with action research, I'm sort of not really joking. You can get the cheaper cameras, and it's a simple, practical advice that they get damaged. Particularly, I don't know which sports you're particularly looking at. So that's one of the things, becoming really familiar with the technology. Although that said, it's just trial and error. I mean, as I sort of pointed out in my talks, often when things went wrong, that's when I learned, and it produced different ways of understanding the world. So that was fun as well. We spoke earlier about introducing that and being very, very upfront. I'm always very upfront about what this is going to be used for, how it's going to be used. It's absolute transparency, and respecting their wishes at all times. Also have a careful think. I don't know, the sport is going to determine how the cameras are employed. So, for example, like I said, people hold them in different action sports. They use them in very, very different ways. It's not the same everywhere. So, for example, they'll use different attachments to the body. Like in parkour, they'll attach them to arms. They don't just attach them to heads. They attach them to chests and things like that. So be aware of the role, that sort of angle of the shot and what that can and cannot pick up. I'd also encourage, like, which sport are you talking about, and anything in particular?
Yeah, I was thinking about either doing surfing or skateboarding, both of which I'm kind of a part of, I'd say.
Yeah. Like when it comes to the media, skateboarders are the most familiar and the most media adept. They're going to be quite welcoming of this. I've sort of even dealt with them in the past. And in fact, they're using they'll get angles and they'll get footage that you never dreamed of, and change and influence your research in that way. So yeah, what else would I say? Oh, that's about all really. But we could have a more detailed, practical discussion, I guess. I think when you sort of start out, I'm not going to get all theoretical about it. I think you just jump in at the deep end and you start getting the footage and see what comes of it. You know, it's a creative process, you know, and that's a good way to approach it, as a creative process.
Thanks.
I would add to that. I mean, one of the lessons I always teach my students in methodology is, like, try it out when it doesn't count. You know, I practiced, you know, filming the first time around my house, just following my dogs around. You know, to sort of like my own understanding of how my cameras work and what scenes look like. And I mean, I think that it's such a graduate student thing, and I was like this when, you know, I first started interviewing people. I was live with the interview process, right? I mean, it mattered. You know, I had people, you know, I had ticket scalpers at the MA level, the master's level, and I was interviewing them, and I'd never really practiced on other people. And I think it goes a long way just to give it a go. But, you know, I agree that it's a creative process, and you're probably going to have to try to figure stuff out as you go most of the time.
Thanks.
Yours?
I have the same question.
Oh, can I add one thing? Can I add something here?
Sure.
Can I just add one thing? Yeah. Sorry to cut anyone off. So just one more thing. It just made me think about it. This is going to sound stupid, but if you're going to try and pick up audio, you're going to have to expand your technological know-how, particularly if you're going to surfing. And it's okay on land to record skateboarding, etc., like that. But the recording sounds on these action cameras, the microphones are rubbish. So you have to invest in hydrophones, which I'm experimenting with now, and things. But again, this becomes an expensive enterprise, and it's difficult without research funding. But it comes a case where you start to look up online how to build them for 15 cents, you know, because it's the only way of doing these things. Don't last, you know. It's the nature of doing that particular research. So I would expand the equipment that I have as cheaply as possible, not just using those cameras maybe now. Sorry. Yeah.
I also have the same question, so I think I'm not the right person to answer the question. One thing I noticed, which I think I can share, is better to spend good amount of time with the people, because the reaction of people changes actually with the camera. And then camera is so obviously there. People react so much, as opposed to you just show up with your body, with maybe pencils, for example. So this is a very different part. And then the more people get used to the existence of camera, probably they will act differently. I'm not saying which is better. You know, very fresh reaction will be also important. But simply the span of time will enables you to see different reactions. So in that sense, maybe better to have good amount of time in the field with camera.
That's a very interesting point you make there about it. It's not about it being better or worse if people are aware of the camera. Because I mean, if I think about interviewing, we often talk about how do we create rapport? Are we insider? How do we form connections? But actually, sometimes that outsider perspective, or sometimes the antagonistic interviewing, or you see different things. You bring different things in when there's a bit of a disruption. So thinking about how the camera might actually be a disruption, and that could still be productive. That's an interesting thing to consider, I think. Do we have any other questions? I want to thank all our speakers, Nick and Jesse and Brian, also for helping to organize this. This has been really interesting for us. I think everyone's raised the point that these are things that we're working through, and we need more spaces to talk about them, to share with them beyond sort of the polished outputs that we often see. Something this is our second seminar, but something that I think is coming as a reoccurring theme is the need to teach and learn. To teach and learn that we're trying new things, and sometimes that requires new skills, and the more we can help each other along, the more we're all going to benefit. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your work with us, and let's keep this conversation going, on the blog, on Twitter, wherever we need to. Let's meet up at conferences. Let's be a part of promoting some very, very creative work. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.